TSI Dynamics Under Diabetes Influence, number 1566, the 9th of March 2026, Gerald C. EclaireMD Foundation, category, Stroke Risk Modeling. Introduction. Around the time I arrived in Honolulu on February 28, 2026, I began thinking about how to quantify the triggering sensitivity index TSI of my stroke risk in a simple, accurate, and more practical way, from a mechanical viewpoint. A stroke event does not occur simply because blood pressure is high. Instead, it usually occurs when two conditions act together: vascular damage caused by long-term metabolic disease, especially diabetes, and a trigger, one acute hypertension. Pulse pressure PP equals SBP DBP reflects the stiffness of the arterial system. When arteries lose elasticity due to aging, calcification, or long-term metabolic damage from diabetes, pulse pressure increases. This indicates that the vessel wall has become structurally more vulnerable. At the same time, systolic blood pressure SBP represents the acute hemodynamic load applied to the vessel wall. When systolic pressure rises sharply, it produces strong mechanical stress on already stiffened and fragile blood vessels. When these two factors coexist, vascular stiffness and acute pressure load interact in a nonlinear dynamic manner. If vessels are stiff but pressure remains low, rupture risk remains moderate. If pressure spikes but vessels are still flexible, the damage risk may remain limited. However, when high stiffness and acute pressure elevation occur together, the probability of vascular rupture increases disproportionately. This interaction represents the pathological mechanics behind my recent stroke event in June 21, 2025. Two TSI models, based on this mechanical interaction. I first formulated a quantitative proxy called the Stroke Risk Triggering Sensitivity Index C. The original TSI equation with two factors is C equals SBP DBP over 45 asterisk SBP 120 asterisk 100, where SBP equals systolic blood pressure, DBP equals diastolic blood pressure, PP equals SBP DBP pulse pressure. The normalization constants of 45 mg for pulse pressure and 120 mmHg for systolic blood pressure represent reference values associated with relatively healthy vascula. Our conditions. TSI is not merely a blood pressure index, it is a stress amplification model that combines vascular stiffness with acute hypertension. Its purpose is to serve as my personal early warning tool rather than a clinical tool designed for the general population. Multiplication, rather than addition, is essential in this equation because stroke risk increases disproportionately when stiffness and pressure rise together. TSI therefore captures the multiplicative interaction between these mechanical factors and serves as a convenient stroke risk monitoring and early warning tool on my iPhone screen. Another important point is that TSI is most meaningful when interpreted as a trajectory rather than as a single number. Observing the progression and changes along the TSI trajectory provides far more insight than relying on a single snapshot measurement. Upgrading the TSI model, after further reflection on the amplification factor of 100 used in the original TSI equation with two inputs, I realized that the model could be improved by incorporating a third factor representing the metabolic condition of the vascular structure itself. The original model only captured the hemodynamic load acting on the vessel. However, long-term diabetes causes progressive structural damage to the vessel wall through glycation, endothelial injury, arterial stiffening, and calcification. Therefore, the structural condition of the vessel material should also be represented in the model. To incorporate this structural factor, I introduced daily estimated average glucose EG as a metabolic proxy representing diabetes-related vascular damage. The upgraded TSI equation with three factors is TSI equals SBP DBP over 45 asterisk SBP 120 asterisk EAG 140 asterisk 120. This modified TSI proxy now incorporates pressure interacting components: 1. Diabetes-related vascular structural damage to vascular stiffness, 3. Acute hypertension hemodynamic load. In engineering language, the model now captures both the material condition of the structure and the external load applied to that structure. In simple mechanical terms, stroke risk can be viewed as the interaction between vessel structural weakness and the instantaneous pressure load applied to that structure. The TSI therefore serves as a practical proxy that quantifies this interaction in real time. I selected 140 mg DL instead of 120 mg DL as the normalization factor for the EG component because metabolic vascular damage becomes more meaningful once glucose rises beyond the near normal range 1-2. 0 mg DL and enters sustained hyperglycemic territory, such as 140 mg DL. The amplification factor was also adjusted from the original 100 to 120 so that the relative magnitude of the new 3-input TSI remains comparable to the earlier 2-input TSI. This adjustment allows both models to be plotted within the same numerical range for trajectory comparison. This TSI proxy therefore provides a relative sense of urgency of stroke risk rather than representing an absolute biomarker value. Data overview. To evaluate the behavior of this upgraded model, I examined a dataset spanning from October 1, 2024 through March 9, 2026. This time window focuses on the 8 months immediately before and 8 months after my hemorrhagic stroke event on 6/21 to 27/2025. This 18-month dataset is more useful for identifying the dynamics of the triggering sensitivity index C surrounding the actual stroke event that occurred at Stanford University Hospital from 6/21 to June 27, 2025. The event window can be viewed as 2 subperiods: pre-stroke period of about 9 months, from the 1st of October 2024 to June 20, 2025. Post-stroke period of about 9 months, from June 28, 2025 to the 9th of March 2026, for understanding the stroke event itself. This shorter 18-month window centered around the hemorrhagic stroke incident on June 21, 2025 provides a clearer view of the TSI dynamics within this period. The TSI trajectory reveals several important observations. New 3-input TSI interpretation using the upgraded 3-input TSI model SBP, pulse pressure, and EEG. The trajectory of stroke risk becomes much clearer when examining the period surrounding the hemorrhagic stroke event. The highest value of the 3-input TSI occurred in June 2025 at approximately 111.30. This timing coincides directly with the month of my hemorrhagic stroke on June 21, 2025. Prior to this peak, the TSI values had already remained elevated for several months. From late 2024 through early 2025, the index stayed above the typical baseline level TSI near or above 100. Indicating that the vascular system had been operating under sustained metabolic and hemodynamic stress. This pattern suggests that the vascular system had already entered a period of structural vulnerability before the actual stroke event occurred. From an engineering perspective, the trajectory of the 3-input TSI resembles a typical 3-stage structural failure process. Stage 1. Stress accumulation during late 2024 and early 2025. The C values remained elevated, indicating that the vascular system was experiencing combined metabolic and hemodynamic stress. Chronic diabetes-related vascular damage and persistent blood pressure loading gradually increased the overall stress acting on the vessel walls. Stage 2. Structural weakening. As this stress continued over time, microscopic structural damage likely accumulated within the vascular wall. Although the vessels continued to function, their structural tolerance was gradually reduced due to the combined effects of metabolic damage, arterial stiffening, and repeated pressure loading. Stage 3. Triggering load. On June 21, 2025, an acute systolic blood pressure spike of approximately 175 mmHg occurred. This sudden hemodynamic load exceeded the remaining structural tolerance of the already weakened vessel wall and resulted in hemorrhagic rupture. In structural mechanics, the moment of maximum stress does not always coincide with the moment of failure. Instead, repeated or sustained stress can produce microscopic internal damage similar to my cerebral microvascular calcification that accumulates. Over time, the structure may continue functioning temporarily while its internal strength gradually deteriorates. This phenomenon is widely observed in fatigue failure of bridges, ships, aircraft structures, buildings, and pressure vessels. The vascular system appears to behave in a similar manner. Long-term metabolic damage, elevated vascular stiffness, and repeated blood pressure loading gradually weaken the vessel structure until a sudden pressure spike exceeds TH remaining structural tolerance. Two-layer stroke model observations from this dataset support a two-layer interpretation of stroke risk. Layer 1. Long-term structural damage. Decades of diabetes and metabolic disease gradually weaken the vascular wall through glycation, endothelial injury, calcification, and loss of elasticity. Layer 2. Acute hemodynamic trigger. Blood pressure spikes produce sudden mechanical stress on already weakened vessels. Stroke occurs when these two layers intersect. In simple engineering language, metabolic disease weakens the structure. Blood pressure spikes. Provide the triggering load when instantaneous load exceeds the remaining structural strength of the vessel wall. Rupture occurs. Interpretation of the upgraded 3-input TSI model. When the metabolic factor E is incorporated into the equation, the behavior of the TSI curve changes significantly. The upgraded 3-input equation is TSI equals SBP DBP / 45 * SBP 120 * EG / 140 * 120. By adding E, the model now captures the long-term metabolic damage caused by diabetes. Chronic hyperglycemia gradually damages the vascular wall through endothelial dysfunction, glycation of proteins, and arterial calcification. Because the equation now reflects both metabolic structural damage and acute hemodynamic load, the resulting TSI trajectory as shown in attached figure aligns much more closely with the actual stroke event. The peak of the 3-input TSI appears in June 2025, the same month as the hemorrhagic stroke. This alignment indicates that the upgraded model better captures the combined mechanics of vascular weakening and pressure loading that led to vessel rupture. The old 2-input TSI model, which included only blood pressure factors, could not show the peak stroke risk in June 2025 as clearly as the new 3-input TSI model. This result supports my intuitive conclusion. Through decades of engineering and pathophysiology analysis, together with observation of over 4 million biomedical data points, I sensed that the earlier 2-factor model was missing a key structural component. Incorporating glucose as a metabolic factor allows the model to represent both condition of the vascular material and the external pressure load applied to that material. Therefore, I can now clearly see the improved early warning capability provided by this new 3-input TSI model. This study introduces an upgraded TSI model that incorporates 3 interacting factors: vascular stiffness, acute hemodynamic load, and diabetes-related metabolic damage. The upgraded 3-input TSI model represents both sides of the mechanical system: external load acting on the vessel's structural strength of the vessel wall. Analysis of the event-centered dataset suggests that stroke should be understood as a structural failure event of the vascular system. In simple engineering terms, stroke occurs when hemodynamic load exceeds vascular structural strength. This upgraded 3-input TSI trajectory therefore provides a practical personal monitoring tool that helps detect dangerous stress conditions before a potential stroke event. Disclaimer: I write this paper not for fame, but to share what I have learned so others can understand their health, prevent disease, and live longer, healthier lives. This content is provided for educational reference only and does not constitute medical advice. No doctor-patient relationship is created. You may share this summary freely, but it must not be altered, edited, or republished as your own. All intellectual property rights and copyrights for this article and its related materials belong to TSI author, Gerald C. This content is provided for educational reference only and does not constitute medical advice. No doctor-patient relationship is created. You may share this summary freely, but it must not be altered, edited, or republished as your own. All intellectual property rights and copyrights for this article and its related materials belong to the author, Gerald C.